This is a lovely
legacy of Mandela is not on the subject.
Mr. Bester, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much. Well done. I'm congratulating you in advance.
Thank you, Mr. Bester. Sure.
Because I was actually
Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, and speakers, welcome to South African Ambassador Sise Mumbani, Benjamin Pogren, Glassman, and special guest from South Africa, Nick Walt. I wish to welcome former Israeli Ambassador to South Africa, Ms. Tova Herzl, and thank her for agreeing to be our host this evening. I'd also like to welcome Member of Knesset Dov Lippman. So my name is Dave Bloom, for those of you who don't know. I'm currently the chairman of Telfed, the South African Zionist Federation in Israel. Sorry? I mentioned Basel? Nick, I mentioned? And Basel? Yes. Yeah? Okay, done. Sorry. Forgive me if I missed that. Telfed is the umbrella organization for former Southern Africans in Israel, and its main role is the successful absorption of our fellow immigrants. We are also a community organization and provide a range of services from scholarships, welfare, and rental housing. I've had the privilege of working with a great team of people to put this event together: Johnny Zassman, Max Moss, Les Glassman, Doron Klein, Gidi Shimoni, and Benjamin Pogren. I'd also like to thank Tanya Mondlin, who has a photography exhibition out front. I urge you to have a look at it afterwards. She's put together a wonderful exhibition of photographs, and thank you, Tanya, for doing that. At the outset, I wish to say on behalf of the partner organizations, Telfed, the South African Embassy, Wits alumni, and Forum Surah, that our common background as former Southern Africans brought us naturally together with a desire and vision to learn from the legacy of Nelson Mandela, who sadly passed away just 7 months ago. Madiba was by far one of the greatest leaders of our time, and this evening we hope to talk about those qualities and how they may be relevant to our own situation. I do want to stress that whatever is expressed here this evening is the opinion of the people concerned and has no connection whatsoever to the organizers and sponsors of this event. You will hear later that we don't want it to be just a once-off affair, but wish to start a project around the Mandela legacy that will inspire future leaders of this region. But I just want to also start with some housekeeping issues, and that is to do with the security situation. I'm going to divide the hall up in two. If you can imagine, there's a line running down the middle of the hall. Those of you who, Julian, you're on that side, and Les, you're on the other side. So there's a line coming down the middle. Sorry? So half the people in this on the right-hand side, please note, you have to leave from this side of the hall if the siren goes off. We have 1.5 minutes. You don't have to panic. You've got plenty of time. You turn right when you come out here, and you will go out the entrance where you came in, and turn right immediately, and there's a stairwell, which is a secure area. It's 2 glass doors. You just push the doors and go through, and people can go up the stairs and down the stairs. That's this half of the hall. Okay? The other half of the hall, left or down the other side, will go out the same entrance. You'll come out this door here. You go down the corridor, make a left, and go all the way down to the bottom, and there's a room there. You'll see signs saying, I believe, Cheder, I think it's 134. And that is also a secure area. I hope we have a quiet evening. I hope we have no sirens. And I really thank you for coming. I know it's been a bit nerve-wracking these last few days, and we appreciate you making it here this evening. No, those doors automatically open. You just push them and they automatically open.
Yeah, but you still have to move the easels.
Sorry?
You still have to move the easels.
The easels. Okay, we'll move the easels. The other housekeeping issue is that we're on quite a tight time schedule this evening. We were given this hall gratis by the Tel Aviv, the Academic College of Tel Aviv Jaffa, and we want to thank them for giving us this hall this evening. But they asked us that we vacate by 9 o'clock. So you should know that the event will be over and we have to be out of here by 9 o'clock. One last thing I just want to make clear from a housekeeping point of view. When we get to the Q&A section, and Tova will also be giving you a little bit of some guidelines, please keep it to questions and not statements. We'd like to hear questions from the floor and not speeches. Okay? So, I'm going to... one last thing. I want to make a special thanks to the Telfed staff who helped take all the logistics behind the scenes, to take all the bookings, particularly to Sharon Bernstein for handling all the bookings. I'd like to thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to kick off with a short film which has been put together by Yair Moss, Max Moss's son, and thank him for doing that as well.
Thank you very much.
Against the past laws was shot at by police. 69 people died. The nationalist government imposed martial law. All opposition was banned and thousands were jailed. When it became clear that all means of peaceful negotiation had been exhausted, Mandela went underground to lead the armed struggle.
We have made it very clear in our policy that South Africa is a country of many races. There is room for all the various races in this country. There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
In 1962, Mandela was captured, charged with leaving the country illegally, and sentenced to imprisonment for 5 years. Shortly afterwards, his ANC comrades were captured with evidence which incriminated Mandela. He returned to court for the Livonia trial, where he and 8 others faced a possible death penalty.
The very speech which was made by Nelson consolidated the spirit of the people on side, because it was a defiant spirit.
I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all nations live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if need be, it is an idea for which I am prepared to die.
When Nelson Mandela and several of his colleagues were sentenced to life imprisonment in 1964, the political convicts were sent to Robben Island. the Big Island prison off the Western Cape Coast. Nelson Mandela was 45 years old when he became prisoner number 466 of 1964. In 1990, at the age of 71, Mandela was released unconditionally.
Cold-blooded murder of Chris Hani has sent a shock waves throughout the country and the world. Our greater anger is tearing us apart.
Millions of South Africans, black and white, through the country, have over the past days demonstrated their grief and anger at this horrendous deed.
Our main concern is the security in town, because there are right-wing elements there.
A white man, full of prejudice and hate, came to our country and committed a deed so foul that our whole nation now teeters on the brink of disaster. A white woman of Afrikaner origin risked her life so that we may know and bring to justice this assassin.
After leading negotiations for a new South Africa, Nelson Mandela cast his vote in the first free and democratic elections and became the country's first black president.
Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another.
For the duration of his presidential term, and throughout what should have been a well-earned retirement, he has worked tirelessly to entrench the ideals he has so long stood for, becoming universally revered as an icon of leadership and humanity.
It was a memorable African afternoon.
Francois, and then we had 65,000 South Africans here today. Tremendous support. David, we didn't have 60,000 South Africans. We had 43 million South Africans.
The President to the Captain. A moment that helped shape a new rainbow nation. A moment crafted by the charisma, the dignity, and the understated genius of one very special man.
Nelson Mandela, Madiba, we salute you.
Thanks again to Yair. Okay. And I wish to welcome MK Dov Lipman to say a few words. MK Rabbi Dov Lipman moved from Silver Spring in years. Sorry, South Africa, we're a bit limited. To Bet Shemesh, Israel 9 years ago with his wife and 4 children. MK Rabbi Lipman has rabbinic ordination from Ner Israel Rabbinical College and a Master's in Education from Johns Hopkins University. The author of 3 books about Judaism and an experienced educator, MK Lipman rose to national and international prominence for his role in challenging and combating religious extremists in Bet Shemesh. He was elected to the 19th Knesset as a member of the Yesh Atid party, led by MK Yair Lapid, and is the first American-born MK in close to 30 years.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, all the honored guests. I spent a few hours today in Ashdod, and I saw the spot where a rocket fell not so many hours ago. Saw the destruction that rocket brought with it. 200 meters away from a wedding hall that was filled with 300 people, and by all estimates, had it just 200 meters away, we'd be dealing with a catastrophe. I went from there to visit the Iron Dome battery in Ashdod and spoke to the soldiers there and expressed the appreciation that we as a country feel for the remarkable work that they're doing. And then on the way here, I start getting panicked phone calls because the sirens are going off in Beit Shemesh, they're going off in Jerusalem, and I can proudly report that there were rockets that were shot towards Jerusalem and they were shot down by the Iron Dome as well. We're living in very challenging, difficult times. We as a country, with the situation with Gaza, we dealing with the mourning period over the 3 boys that were kidnapped and then killed, reeling as a country from the fact that our youth brutally murdered an Arab youth, so much going on. And as we think about this entire picture, I think that we would do well to learn from some of the lessons of Nelson Mandela and apply them to ourselves. I am privileged to serve as the representative for the Knesset in our relationship with members of the South African Parliament. I'll be, God willing, going in September for a week-long visit, meeting with members of Parliament there. And as part of that role, I was honored to travel to South Africa for the memorial ceremony for Nelson Mandela. And I have to tell you that I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to expect. We're going to a country I'm not familiar with customs and a culture I'm not familiar with. And we walked into this stadium, and we were sitting there with members of Parliament from around the world. And in a matter of minutes, we were caught up in this remarkable spirit. Remarkable spirit. And looking around, you see people who just exude, they showed a uplifted nature, and you realized how this man touched their lives. But here's the amazing thing. On the one hand, you saw how they were uplifted. On the other hand, every single time they showed on the screen the current president of South Africa, everybody booed. and for me, this was amazing to see on the one hand, people perhaps unhappy with the current situation, but on the other hand, still believing that it's possible to have a remarkable future. And I came across just a few quotes from Nelson Mandela which touched on this point. I am fundamentally an optimist. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lays defeat and death. Quote number 1, the eternal optimist. Number 2, it always seems impossible until it's done. Quote number 3, do not judge me by my successes, judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again. And finally, number 4, when people are determined, they can overcome anything. When we look at the difficult times that we are living in, and we're searching for a role model, that despite everything that's happening, what country in the world has hundreds of missiles targeted at civilians, and yet has the ability to continue on? But that's the spirit. It's the optimism of, it's specifically through our challenges that we can move forward. And that's what I saw in that stadium. People who maybe they don't have the greatest lives at the moment. They might not be happiest with the situation, but they were caught up in a spirit of optimism, of hope. And I have to tell you that after an hour and a half in that stadium, I learned how to sway along with the crowd as well. It was a really remarkable experience. But aside from that, I learned, and I spoke to people when I was there about Nelson Mandela. And I learned that the greatest act of this man wasn't the years that he stayed in prison. I mean, it's phenomenal, it's remarkable, but it's how he acted when he was freed from prison. At that moment, South Africa could have been, he could have sparked a civil war in the streets. All the anger from all the years could have come out, and yet he chose a different path. That's such an incredible message for us in the difficult place where we live. Everything that we experience here, everything, could build up anger and a hate and calls for revenge and things that might be foreign to our culture, but yet it's natural as a human being to feel that way. I stood there today and saw this hole in the ground that destroyed a business. And why isn't that man going out and calling for revenge and saying, let's find a way to lash out at our enemies? But then again, we have these quotes from Nelson Mandela. Quote number 1, "For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." Number 2, resentment, this one really touches me deeply. Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping that that will kill your enemies. And where does that come from? Where does it come from to have that perspective? And this is something that we here have to keep in mind at all times, both in terms of our struggles with our enemies, and I have to say even internally, and even amongst the Jewish people in Israel. The last quote, "Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished." To understand that in every single human being, you can find that good, regardless of whatever that person has done to you. You can find that good. That, I believe, is the lesson and the legacy that he left not only to South Africa, not only to people who lived in South Africa and moved elsewhere, but to all of humanity. I, as someone who just spent 8 hours in South Africa, I try to think about this message daily because we have challenges on a daily level, both to find that source of optimism and to find that source of good in every person despite all the evil that we see around us. And that, I believe, is the message that we, living in Israel, in July 2014, with everything that surrounds us, that's the message that we should take with us. And therefore, as we internalize that message, we need to be eternally thankful to this leader, always remember those messages, and transmit those messages to our children, to our grandchildren, to our students, and to the entire country. And if we do so, we will be better people, we will be a better nation, and God willing, we will be a greater state as well. Thank you so much, and let's try to keep those messages with us at all times.
Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Tova Herzl, who's actually going to become our MC for the rest of the evening. Those of you who don't know, Tova took early retirement from the Israel Foreign Service in 2003. Her last post was ambassador to South Africa. In serving there, she completed a personal cycle, which began in the 1960s, when she was the child of Hebrew teachers in Cape Town. She was Israel's first ambassador to Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and served twice as congressional liaison in Washington. Her first book, Madam Ambassador, Behind the Scenes with a Candid Israeli Diplomat, will be published in November. Shea Batzlacha.
Thank you very much, Dave. It feels like about 3 years ago when I was asked to MC this evening at the rate that things are going here. I don't have to tell you. And I kept thinking about, like, what would I say, which approach would I take, how would I introduce Mandela, but because of the way things are happening, I actually came here not knowing how I would start. And when I watched the film, it did two things to me. I wanted to smile and I wanted to cry. Even though I've seen every little bit of that film countless times before, that's what it did to me. Now, the audience here, people don't necessarily share political opinions about what's going on in Israel, about what's going on in South Africa, but I think everybody is united in that the film aroused in them this emotion of smiling. Mandela made everybody feel comfortable and happy and as a fellow human being, and very nostalgic really for the touching man that he was. And I think from that basis we can start this evening. We have a very, very impressive panel here this evening, and we're starting with Ambassador Ngobane, who's been here about a year and a half, and he told me a little bit about his previous postings. He had postings in Africa, and he had postings in Asia, and I think he will agree with me that this is probably the most challenging of his postings to date. And whatever his career still has in store for him, this is going to be the most challenging posting. Whatever South Africa says, whatever the ANC says, he's responsible for it, he's got to account for it. And I think it will be very interesting to hear his angle on the legacy of Mandela and what we came here to learn. So Ambassador, please. I just want to say that every one of the speakers has about 15 to 20 minutes. If anybody wants to speak for just 10, that will give us more time for questions and answers. Truly is an outstanding panel. I'm sure we're all going to leave this evening enriched. Please.
Our hosts, the organizers, of course, Telfed, Victoria Holland, Lisa Muni, and our moderator and director today, MP, Joe Friedman, and other respected speakers who came and took trouble to be here tonight. Really, very, very warm welcome. Of course, we are in a situation which maybe some would say during their day, we are going to get a call and say, cancel the event is cancelled or something. So this is those times. But to the people who have made this trip here, very senior people, some really relevant, who would have been my mother, my father. Thank you very much for taking this opportunity to come here. It means a lot to me personally, because it tells me that deep down there are people who still care. It's easy not to care. There are people who care about what's happening to South Africa, what's happening to Israel, and what we should be doing. So thank you for that. I made a small speech which I tried to write, and not being, trying to find words, trying to remember the very, very important person in our history, and also a person who was really at the level of my father. So for me, the speech I did is titled "The Mandela I Knew, the Mandela I Met." Because the Mandela I knew as a young man, and it's actually the period when you see the martial law declared. I was about 5 years old, about 6. There were no cars in my village. And the first cars I saw were military cars. It was the army. And so it stuck in my mind. How to comprehend this? And then, of course, we grew up with a new republic, South Africa moving from Commonwealth to Republic. And then, of course, we quickly had to learn that there were things that were not mentioned in public, otherwise we'd be arrested. We wouldn't mention ANC, we wouldn't mention Communist Party, we wouldn't mention anything. And of course, Mandela himself wouldn't mention it because we would be arrested. So this is Mandela. I knew as a young man. Mandela became a hero, and the Mandela that I tried to follow. I followed and I became an ANC member. 1978 somewhere. I'm still an ANC member. I have to answer the question of I'm a career diplomat. I'm not attending rallies or participating and campaigning to be a member of parliament or a cabinet, but I'm still an ANC member. So I'm going to come to that point. People have seen a statement which has upset a few people. Right at the end, I will explain some of the things that I think we should be doing. The Mandela Amendment, it starts again to the clip you saw. A life sentence meant a life sentence in South Africa, with no chance of parole. The little parole that was given to hard criminals and not political prisoners. And death in prison of all political life prisoners was a grim reality facing South Africa. Some activists had already been hanged and others were to follow. But the reality was to change as elderly political prisoners were released, such as Gordon Blake, Walter Sisulu, and many others. But they were not just released, they were released through negotiations by Nelson Mandela with the government. There were many who were skeptical about negotiations conducted by a prisoner who was imprisoned by the same government and negotiating with them. As you know, the leadership of the African National Congress in exile had to deal with that situation. They had to analyze and give guidance. And they arrived at a correct conclusion and a telling one. And that conclusion was Mandela had gone to prison a leader of the black people of South Africa, a national leader. He had grown to be an international statesman, an international leader. He was bigger than any of the leaders we had produced. This was not an accident. As the African National Congress had decided that the struggle of South African people would be rallied around the figure of Nelson Mandela. In his first appearance in Lusaka, I was present, and I met him, received him from the airport, and Mandela in life was indeed that leader. We had so many things to grumble about in being in exile, unhappy about leadership, unhappy about this and that. But Mandela had a larger picture, a view, and a determination, which made him to be looking far ahead. And that gave me an advantage in dealing with any of the people around him. Because prison had taught Mandela not to focus on the immediate condition, but to look far, far ahead. You have quoted Nelson Mandela many times, and I will just add this one, which he wrote in his book, talking about him getting out of prison. He said, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. I would never escape prison. I had to liberate myself. I had to leave my bitterness. So Mandela always emphasized and worked in a collective of the liberation movement. He was a giant, but he always worked in that collective. He would accept majority and you say, I disagree the way you see things, but democracy says you're the majority. I have to accept it sometimes. Then, he was very strict on time. Always wouldn't fail. I remember when he visited the European Parliament, I was there as a young man, representing the ANC in Brussels. And he was received by the Parliament and went to see King Leopold of Belgium. There was a small problem about our departure, his delegation. Although he normally wouldn't leave his delegation behind, but when he had to meet a statesman, a personality, he would not be late. So he left us. And we arrived, he had already been ushered in to meet the king of Leopold. And that was Mandela. Mandela was a family man who, despite his incarceration and harassment of the family, tried to keep them together. When he painfully divorced from Winnie Mandela, he was able to move on with dignity and found love with Miss Glassman. True to the tradition, Mandela paid a dowry in Lobola of 70 head of cattle to the prize club. He had a good eye for beauty, for beautiful women, and enjoyed meeting them, like Naomi Campbell, Charlize Theron, and others. Mandela had a deep sense of love for children, and since his retirement from office as president, he dedicated all his energies to improve the lot of children. In his honor, he asked that the Children's Hospital be built in South Africa, specializing only in children. All the things and needs of children. And when I read a foreword to Walter Sisulu's book, he wrote, "Often, in addressing younger people, I make the point that what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that determines the significance of the life we lived." End quote. In 1995, and I'm finishing now, I was greatly honored as a young ambassador to carry 7 letters of credence from Nelson Mandela. 7. To French-speaking Africa, West Africa. I was appointed, and those letters say, "I appoint Ambassador Sisangomana to you, Your Excellency." And what he says, take it as coming from me. It was one of the great honors I've had. And I've recently said I want the copies of those letters because they're special. So finally, when we reflect on Mandela, I just want to end again with a small quote from him, trying to put the context of who he is, who he was. So he wrote, I quote, in a biography to Walter Sisulu, and I quote, he says, "If we, as a liberation movement and a nation, were to be given the choice of one life story to be told, that story would have to be Walter Sisulu's. In his life, and the work of his life, are captured and demonstrated the best, the noblest, the most heroic, the most deeply humane that our movement and our country represent and seek to represent. Walter Sisulu and the wife. That's Mandela. End quote. Thank you very much for this honor. Can I just end and say, we have among us here a lady I've met for the first time now. We have been corresponding. And she's been working on a project. She lectures at the University of Tel Aviv. And she lectures on transitional justice and something. It's Sigal Horowitz. You can just stand up and say, let me.
One of the cases we get inspiration from, of course, is South Africa, which we teach the students. And they start, obviously, comparing and drawing analogies and thinking of the future here. And it gives us a lot of hope.
See, just took 5 students from Tel Aviv University only about 2 weeks ago, and 5 students from Hebron University. And it was the time of the tragic kidnapping of these young 3 children. And of course, there was a military clampdown in Hebron. Nobody would move. And working with her and me and made the foreign colleague, the foreign minister, talked to the military commander. The students from Hebron were able to join the 5 students from Tel Aviv University to go to University of Johannesburg for a seminar. They have just come back. Thank you for this.
Thank you for your support and help.
Yes, and that's one small thing. As I said, I'm ANC. You know here, when we were prepared, I am a member of staff who's sitting somewhere there. He said, but Ambassador, when you said I must come, you said there's going to be Wolf. You know, is that the son of Arnold Wolf? I said, yes, it's him. He said, of course, he used to teach us in the camps. ANC camps, the father, to Nick. But the important thing to take on this is that there's a legacy, the Jewish legacy of the liberation in South Africa that was developed. It's there. When you get the statements, we're missing something. There's a thing we're missing, the Jewish contribution. But more importantly, the young people have to find their role of how to contribute to the liberation. The challenge that South Africa faces now, and it's part of South Africa.
Thank you very much. No, you're fine. We're on schedule. Perfect. Thank you very much. NK Rabbi Lippman is apologizing that he has to leave because of the situation. Thank you very much for coming. He has to go on to another meeting. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
You mentioned Walter Shomir. Okay, you hear me now? No. Switch it on.
Check it.
I talk loud.
Is it not your voice? Yeah, okay, so go up. Before the questions, get them ready for the questions.
I paid a call on Walter Sisulu when I was in South Africa, and he told me this is a little known piece of his biography. He actually spent a few weeks in Israel on his way to a trip to Europe. I believe it was in 1952. Ambassador, thank you very much for your insights about Nelson Mandela. The ideal person to follow up on this is Benjamin Pogrund. I'm not going to read everybody's biographies, you all saw them on the websites. But I think of the people sitting at this table who probably knew Mandela as a person better than anybody else. There's something else that was not in his biography, in the CV that appeared on the website, which I think is very important. Just this week, next week, Benjamin has written a very important book which addresses the question of the allegations on Israel and apartheid. A very serious book, which comes from his very serious journalistic background, his good acquaintance of South Africa, his good knowledge of what's going on in Israel. I believe it's a very, very important book. And as it says, nobody's going to be happy with it, so that tells you something about what a good book it's going to be. Benjamin, please.
Thank you, Silva. Mr. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, we're living through hard times, and it is tragedy and pain for everyone in this region, both Israelis and Palestinians. But we have the chance tonight to lift our eyes, to seek inspiration for going forward and how to go forward in the words and deeds of Nelson Mandela. I knew him for more than 55 years. I reported him when he was a lawyer in Johannesburg and a leader in the African National Congress. I reported him when he was working underground to overthrow apartheid. I visited him in prison as a friend. I met him after he was released, when he was president, and when he retired. And among the host of memories of that whole span of years, there is a particular story that stands out, and I've written about it, but I'd like to tell you about it again. It goes back a long way to 1961. The year before, there'd been the Sharpeville massacre after a past protest launched by the Pan-Africanist Congress. And as a result of that, Mandela called for a 3-day stay-at-home. It was called a stay-at-home because strikes by blacks were illegal. But the police were hunting him, and he spent months underground. You might remember it was called the Black Pimpernel. Well, during that time, he and I were meeting secretly. We had a method of exchanging messages, and we'd either meet at a house in the suburbs, or I'd drive my car to a dark corner, a dark street in Johannesburg, and we'd meet there and talk for an hour or so. And this tall, burly, imposing man, and the whole police force, as I say, was hunting, his disguise was a worker's boiler suit. But he got away with it. But the day came that the 3-day strike started. I, by that stage, had become so expert at reporting the townships and riots that I was kept back in the office to collate all the reports coming through from throughout the country. And I sat there through the night working. We were going to bring out an 8 a.m. special edition. And in the way it happens in a newspaper, or can happen, it's not a conspiracy, it's called a cock-up. Sub-editors grab the story, but the government issued a statement, and certainly the Johannesburg municipality, to say the strike had failed. Well, it hadn't. It wasn't quite as great as Mandela had hoped for, but it was not the failure that the government said it was. It was about 50-50. But the Rand Mail came out of the special edition at 8 o'clock, headlines, strike failed. And the Mail at that stage was highly respected in the black community, and hundreds of thousands of people had stayed home to see what was going to happen, because they were scared. They were scared of the police, they were scared of being fired by their bosses, they were scared of the Tsotsis, the gangsters at the end of the day, and they were waiting to see what happened. When the Mail came out and said the strike had failed, people said, that's it, and hundreds of thousands poured out to work. So I sat at my desk feeling crushed, terrible, depressed at what my newspaper had done to Mandela after those months of dangerous work underground. And in mid-morning my phone rang, and I picked it up, and there was this warm, cheery voice, the same as always. And I started just muttering an apology. Didn't know what to say. And he broke through. He cut me off and he said, "It's okay, Ben, to call me. I know it wasn't your fault." It was an act of the most incredible generosity, just to exculpate me from any blame for what we had done to him, because we destroyed that strike of his. And it's a story I've never forgotten, and it's an experience, to me, which personifies the man. More than anything else, that generosity of spirit was Nelson Mandela. And it was his strength. It was his attitude towards others which underpinned his leadership. And his leadership was critical, as we know, in resolving the fight to the death between whites and blacks in South Africa. After 27 years of imprisonment, he emerged into South Africa torn by violence as the black majority struggled for freedom against the ruling white minority. He did not beat the drum of racism easily have done. He did not incite his people with calls for revenge for what they had suffered. Instead, he quelled the anger among his own people and led them on the path of compromise and reconciliation. And it wasn't easy. He had to persuade them. And his courage and vision earned the respect and support of most whites, which allowed for the rise of a new united South Africa of democracy and non-racism. A connected lesson is that he did not act alone. He could not have achieved what he did without the cooperation of whites who commanded the firepower. And his leadership was therefore equally crucial. The last apartheid president, F.W. de Klerk, began on the right wing of his right-wing Afrikaner National Party. His exact role in the last violent years of apartheid remains uncertain. But at the time, he came to recognize that white rule could no longer be sustained, and in facing up to reality, also overcame opposition among his own people, and with equal courage, he urged and persuaded them to pursue a new road. There was, too, another Afrikaner, whose role is little remembered these days, General Constant Viljoen, the former head of the South African Defence Force. He brought together white right-wing groups in the Afrikaner Volksfront, the Afrikaner People's Front. And as the country headed for its first democratic elections with a black government assured, he was said to have 50 to 60,000 army-trained white men ready to fight to preserve Afrikaner interests. As the election in April 94 approached, South Africa, as you'll remember, was on a knife edge. It was in grave danger of sliding into a racial civil war. But only weeks before the elections, Viljoen changed direction, backed away from violence, and opted for the ballot box, taking his people with him. The lessons for Israelis and Palestinians could not be clearer. Leaders who are entering a no-win situation with immense suffering for all involved must acknowledge the situation and for the greater good of their country and people put their political existence on the line by persuading their followers to think radically anew. There is much else to be learnt from Mandela's leadership. If you look at your invitation to this event, at his words, in every dispute you eventually reach a point where neither party is altogether right or altogether wrong, when compromise is the only alternative for those who eventually want peace and stability. Those are words of wisdom, yet sacred, for the ambassador common sense. He realized the importance of symbols, and as you saw in that film clip earlier, he donned a Springbok jersey in 1995 as an act of reconciliation, and that won him the hearts of countless numbers of whites, and especially Afrikaners. His humanity and compassion was shown not only in grand gestures, but in the way he reached out to ordinary people, little people. Among the many, many anecdotes is the one about the first rugby game between South Africa and England after the end of apartheid. And walking onto the field to greet the players, Mandela said to the chairman of the English Rugby Union who was with him, "I hope I'm going to meet the important people." And the chairman said, "Yes, of course, you're going to meet the players." And Mandela said, "No, the important people, the ball boys." Well, his sense of humour, time and again, lightened the most serious of occasions. It was part of his gift for turning enemies into admirers, and highlighted that at the essence of his being was respect for the other and willingness to talk and to listen. However, care is needed in seeking lessons from him. Understandably, whether Palestinians or Israelis, leftists or rightists, people take from Mandela only the words or lessons they perceive best illustrate their beliefs or struggle. And unfortunately, only too often, their choices are based on incorrect knowledge about Mandela and the nature of the struggle for freedom in South Africa. Violence is a much misinterpreted issue. After decades of unsuccessfully pleading with whites to end discrimination, and after the repeated failure of non-violent protests, Mandela and his colleagues took the fateful decision in 1961 to turn to armed resistance. Some hold this up as justifying Palestinian violence against Israeli civilians. However, it was a focused resistance, with attacks targeting property and the military. The policy avoided attacks on civilians, firstly because the African National Congress and its supporters were imbued with Mahatma Gandhi's belief in non-violent protest, and secondly, based on the fact that whites feared being murdered and swept into the sea by the black majority. Thus, indiscriminate killings would have reinforced the fear and stiffened white opposition to yielding power to blacks. During the next 3 decades, the ANC's armed wing, Umkhonto Sizwe, Spirit of the Nation, adhered to this policy with only a few exceptions. And it proved an effective strategy when circumstances changed, because then fear was not a major factor in determining the white attitude towards the transitions to come. Mandela supported Palestinian liberation. Of course he did, he had to. But an important statement he made about it is consistently misused. He is often quoted as saying, quote, "But we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians," unquote. And he did indeed use those words in December 1997 on Palestinian Solidarity Day. However, he went on to say, and the additional words are this, "Without the resolution of conflicts in East Timor, the Sudan, and other parts of the world," unquote. Thus, he spoke about Palestinian liberation in the context of freedom for all people. The omission of the second half of the sentence, whether done out of ignorance or for propaganda purposes, changes the meaning of the universal message in which he believed. He was always straightforward about Israel. He totally opposed the occupation, but he did not question Israel's existence or its right to security. That is important to understand in view of ugly things said about him from the right wing of the Jewish political spectrum. He came under fierce attack for supporting not only Yasser Arafat, but dictators like Castro and Gaddafi. His detractors never understood that during the years of struggle against apartheid, these were the people who aided the ANC while Israel stood back. ANC fighters trained with Palestinians while Cuba and Libya supplied arms and training. When freedom came, it would have been out of character for Mandela to discard those who had stood with him for so long. Nor, as some extremist Jews claim, was he, the phrase is, anti-Semitic to the core, unquote, and deserving of the abuse they were heaping on him in internet comments such as, quote, "a treacherous lying fraud," unquote. His entire life refutes this viciousness, both in terms of his humanity and of the many Jews who were close to him, and as the ambassador referred to it, and supported him, from his personal friends and political comrades through to his lawyers. South Africa and the world, as we all know, were enriched beyond measure by Nelson Mandela. We in Israel and Palestine can benefit not only by honouring him, but by seeking to apply his thinking and his actions to resolving our own tortured conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very thoughtful and
Can't I just talk loud?
Come here.
No, they can hear me. Thank you very much for that very thoughtful and very thought-provoking, for your very thoughtful and thought-provoking comments. We will now hear Bassem Eid, who is a Palestinian human rights activist, and he's an equal opportunity activist. He criticizes the Israelis and the Palestinians, whoever deserves it. He's been several times in South Africa with Benjamin to discuss the issues at hand. He's very familiar with South Africa and with Mandela's legacy and how it influenced South Africa, and we look forward to hearing it.
Thank you, Toba. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, I got the privilege to be in South Africa with my colleague Benjamin for several times for a series of lectures in different universities, in different cities in South Africa, and of course, my favorite city there is Cape Town. Yes, indeed, I think that Mandela, as Mandela, was a kind of a hope, probably much more to the Palestinians rather than to the Palestinian leadership. I think that the Palestinian leadership almost lost the opportunity to use the thinkings, the thoughts, and probably the experiences of Nelson Mandela. I don't remember one day that a Palestinian leader tried to approach Nelson Mandela on one among the other conflicts that we, the Palestinians, got around the world, in turn to get a little bit thoughts how we should have to act in turn to solve it. I remember in the middle of the 90s, I have a friend of mine who is a historian from Haaretz newspaper called Tom Segev. He visited South Africa in the middle of the 90s. He was invited for a party somewhere in Johannesburg, and suddenly he met Nelson Mandela. Tom Segev approached Nelson Mandela and he asked him one question. The question was that people said that Yasser Arafat is the Palestinian Nelson Mandela. Will you agree on that? Then Nelson Mandela just smiled and he turned his back and went. Which is, in my opinion, certainly such thing has been rejected by Nelson Mandela. So this is what we achieved from such kind of a slogan, which is, I am as a Palestinian, in my opinion, that Arafat left and he stuck the whole Palestinians in the mud until today. Now, in my opinion also that Nelson Mandela became as a spirit, probably than much more than anything else. I am so nervous how also the international community lost the opportunity to give Nelson Mandela the position that he really deserved on this earth. I don't think that the international community gave any attention for the struggle of such person that many, many coming generations can learn from his own experience. On the other side, the most important thing, which is, I think, it became much more symbolic towards South Africa and the people of South Africa and Nelson Mandela, is the unity and reconciliation, which is at least I can admit as a Palestinian that we almost failed in both of them, in the unity and in the reconciliation. We didn't succeed on that. Even that looks like that without a goodwill, it's impossible to reach a reconciliation. You need at least a will, not only from your part, but also from the other part. But unfortunately, we the Palestinians totally failed in such kind of things. I was invited, as I mentioned, to South Africa mainly by the Jewish Board of Deputies. And I am very proud to be invited by them anytime to go and to try to give my own impression on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. My impression is that we still have, at least the Palestinians, probably the Israelis are not interesting as the Palestinians should have to learn more and more and to try to involve probably such kind of leaders in South Africa. I know very good leaders in South Africa still alive and still functioning. How we can use these good experiences in turn to improve at least the daily life of the Palestinians. I don't want right now to talk about Gaza. I don't want to talk about Sderot. I was yesterday in Sderot. I was this very early morning nearby the Gaza Strip, and things looks really horrible. In my opinion, if Nelson Mandela will wake up right now, I think that he will cry with us. I think that he will cry with us. On the other side, I must have to say also that as Nelson Mandela deserved his own people and his own country, I believe also that South Africa and the South African people indeed deserves Mandela. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Glassman. This is an unusual opportunity to hear. I'm sure everybody's very good. The mic's not working.
Thank you very much. I'm sure everybody's very pleased to hear your angle on this situation. And our final speaker of this evening is Nick Walpe. The name Walpe needs no explanation to this audience. A few weeks ago I was in Amsterdam and I went to Rembrandt's studio and I was traveling with an art teacher and we said this is like visiting the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. I think in terms of the South African struggle where you work now is really that equivalent of Lillysleaf and all that implies. It's a landmark, it's a very important place. Nick is here as a guest of Yad Vashem, in conjunction with Yad Vashem. It's a meeting point that Israelis and South Africans have. I'm sorry that that's a meeting point, but maybe I think we can have probably, I'm sure the ambassador will agree, many other meeting points, but this is an important meeting point, and I'm glad you're here. And we'd like to hear your angle from the temple that you work in.
Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, it really is indeed an honour and a privilege to be here. And let's start by giving a few anecdotal stories around Nelson. Lord Rennick, who was the former ambassador to South Africa, tells one in particular, which I think to some degree symbolises the meaning and essence of who Mandela is, what he represents, and what he epitomises for not only I think South Africans, but the world in general. He said he gets a call from Nelson and he says, Ambassador, please will you come to Shell House? So he willingly obeys and arrives at Shell House. He walks into a very big boardroom and sits opposite Mandela, and Mandela says, no, please come and sit next to me. And Lord Wits says, this is highly unusual, and I'm the British ambassador, and this is the future president of the Republic of South Africa, and he's asked me to sit next to him. And then he says, lo and behold, the doors open, and in walk 70 Labour MPs. And now he thinks he's in a very awkward situation, because here he is sitting next to the future president, and walking into the room now are 70 Labour MPs. They sit around the table, and Mandela turns to the Labour MPs and says, I'd like you to meet my political advisor, Lord Rennick. At one point, Lord Rennick says he almost chokes on the water he's drinking. Now, why am I telling you this story? Lord Rennick went on to say it was the political shrewdness of Mandela, because he did not want these Labour MPs to attack Margaret Thatcher. He was not interested in engaging in a political discussion around the merits or demerits of her policy towards South Africa. He wasn't interested. And I think that goes to the heart and soul. Here was a leader who branded the ANC, its military wing, Nelson Mandela and all the others as terrorists. We jump forward to the 1990s. He is now a revered leader. Benji discussed it, the ambassadors discussed it, but I think it highlights who he was to a large degree and what his objectives were. I'm just going to, we saw in the film him being interviewed in 1961. That most probably is the most seminal interview he has ever given. Why? Because it gives the first indications that the ANC are moving away from passive resistance to armed struggle. Now, before I go on, I'd like to tell a wonderful anecdotal story regarding that with Ahmed Kathadra. He was the gentleman who was instructed to bring Brian Woodlake to that meeting. The night before, he does a dry run, and he drives around, he goes to the house, and the next day he picks up Brian Woodlake, and during the course of taking Brian Woodlake to meet Mandela at his house, Brian Woodlake says to him, I'd like to congratulate you on the most wonderful, brilliant countermeasure movers I have ever seen to ensure that you're not being followed. And Ahmed Kathadra says, thank you very much. When we were interviewing Ahmed Kathadra, he recants the story. He said, the one thing I did not tell Brian Woodlake is the reality was I got lost and I couldn't remember how to get to the I was driving around and around and around. And I said, that's going to dispel and really upset Brian Woodlake, because he even mentioned to me, he told me how wonderful you were in your countermeasure maneuvers to ensure that you weren't being followed. We told Brian Woodlake and he was incredibly disappointed. He said, that shattered my image of what happened. But the point is, Nelson gives this indication. And again, we must understand it, because again, as we move into the 70s and 80s, they're branded as a terrorist organization. And as Benji has highlighted, they had a policy of Sakatera, which was the notion of passive resistance, influenced by Mahatma Gandhi. And Nelson, leaving a party with my mother one night, turned to her and said, it is with a heavy heart and a heavy hand that we turn to armed struggle. That again highlights the character of the individual, as well as the character of the collective organization. Because I think in talking about Nelson and his legacy, and again, what it means to the current situation here in Israel with the Palestinians, we mustn't lose sight of a very fundamental aspect. He was part of a unique collective. the ambassador made a quote regarding Walter Sisulu. We stand in admiration of a leader who came out of prison after 27 years, who showed no bitterness, who showed no anger, who recognized that in order to take the society that had been torn apart, again we can draw parallels to where we are today in Israel, based upon a racial hatred, a white supremacy, not a hatred for whites, I think we must understand that, but white supremacy. And in the analysis, we always lose that interpretation. It was about white supremacy. He came out of prison, and he realized that in order for the interest of the country, bitterness, hatred, and anger would not take the country forward. But we must acknowledge, underpinning that, are people like O.R. Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Governor Mbeki, Duma Nokwe, Wilton McQuire, J.B. Marks, Moses Katana, because they were all had the same attitude and outlook. In fact, when Nelson came to Johannesburg, he was actually a radical. Mandela, the world had got to know, the Mandela of compromise, the Mandela of understanding, the Mandela who did not seek retribution, but wanted to lay a path of conciliation, because the needs of the country outweighed the needs of the individual. And that was a strong tradition within the ANC. So while we talk about the importance and the legacy of Mandela and what, in the current crisis that is confronting Israel and Palestine, we mustn't lose sight of that he was a representative of an organization that at the heart of its ideals were these principles that he espoused. That these were principles that all these other leaders believed in. There is a wonderful, it's not a wonderful, an incident, I should say, that happened to O.R. Tambo. And again, this epitomizes the notion of tolerance, understanding of what Mandela represented. But not just Mandela, what the ANC as a political organization represented. So again, as Israelis, as citizens of Israel and of Palestine, one also needs to look at the collective leadership. Because there was an incident where O.R. was walking down the street and a white spat in his face. And he said he remembered it. It was something that he remembered very clearly. He spat in his face because he was a black. But in the articulation of that incident, you get no sense of anger, bitterness, resentment, hatred, or hostility. So while we're here this evening to pay homage to a very unique man, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that he was the embodiment of an organization and an embodiment of a collective, a very unique group of collective leaders of selfless sacrifice. When Nelson said from the dock, and before I go on to talk about his I am prepared to die statement, it was written up by Joel Joffe. And everyone knows that famous last element of that statement. If needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. Now, Joel Joffe removed that last statement from what he had written because he was asked to write it up. So when it came back to Nelson to check, Nelson said to Joel Joffe, "Where is it? We don't believe you should say it." Nelson turned to him and said, "You know what, if I don't say it, then everything I stood for has been meaningless, without substance, and without merit, because everywhere I went, I have stated to the people that I am prepared to die. Now here I am, about to deliver a statement of why we as the ANC moved away from passive resistance to armed struggle, and you have removed this element from my speech. It will mean that I was a fraud. Everything I said to the people, it would be meaningless. And it was put back in, and then of course there's debate around whether they should use should, you know, again semantics, but anyway the discussion took place. But why do I say it? Again, it goes to the heart of conviction. We talk about the man, but we mustn't also lose sight of the fact that these were individuals who had deep-seated commitment. Because when he said, I am prepared to die, he was not just speaking for himself. He spoke for the other trialists. That they were prepared to pay the ultimate sacrifice of death for a cause and a belief and a commitment. Now, when we look at the South African situation, in terms of going back, I remember around 85, Joe Slover and my father said, they will never see South Africa again. They are going to die in exile. 5 years later, or I should say from 85, the process of the releasing of the Rivonia trialists began, first with Dennis Goldberg, with the assistance of the Israelis, and then gradually leading through to the end with Big Nelson. Now, why do I raise that? Because it highlights that regardless of how bad things were during the 80s, there was still optimism. There was still a belief. Whether they thought they would achieve it in their lifetime, that was debatable. But there was a firm belief that one day change will come. Now, Benji also made reference to de Klerk. And I think, again, we must show our respect to F.W. de Klerk. Why? Because while we pay homage to Nelson saying, look what he did, cometh the hour, cometh the man, he took us down a path whereby we could have fallen into violent civil war. Again, he mentioned Constance Georgiou. I mean, within that context, the assassination of Chris Hani was the most defining moment in our country. It showed the statesman-like ability of Nelson. A lot of people in the country say that was the time that he became President of the Republic of South Africa, when he went on national TV and said, yes, Chris Hani has been killed, and we know amongst our people there is anger, there is a sense of revenge, that they want the blood, they want to take revenge. And we can go back, because in the early 60s, when they moved to armed struggle, they read the situation perfectly, because they recognized, he and the others recognized also, that moving to armed struggle in the early 60s, they were harnessing the anger of their members. President Zuma last year, at the 50th anniversary of the raid on Louisville, at the dinner, said, we at that point, in 1961, wanted to run through the streets of Durban with machetes, killing every single white person that we could find. But because of the foresight, the understanding of the feeling of the people, MK became the avenue to harness and to channel the anger and resentment that was building up. It would contain them. We jump forward to 1993, and the same foresight that was displayed by Mandela and the other great leaders reappeared, where he went on national TV and said to the people, violence will not achieve what we have struggled for. We have spent 27 years in prison, and we are not going to waste that 27 years by allowing the country to disintegrate into anarchy and war. Because at the end of the day, it is not going to solve the problem that we have had in South Africa, not just since 1948, but we can go back to 300 years. That had a very strong historical root. And why do I raise that? Because when the 3 Israelis were kidnapped, I wondered at that time, and it crossed my mind, why did not the Prime Minister go on national TV and speak to the people of Israel, recognizing that the anger was going to boil up and that there would be a sense of retribution. And that highlights again the understanding of leaders like Nelson Mandela, that they understood the feelings of the people and they needed to ensure that they harnessed the feelings of the people and controlled the feelings of the people to ensure that it doesn't get out of control. And I think that is fundamental to understanding not only Nelson Mandela, who was the symbol and became the symbol of our liberation struggle and became the voice of the liberation struggle, but also the voice of reason. A voice of reason which was also helped by people like de Klerk, because you also need on the other side of the fence your political adversaries to also be brought along. And he had the ability to bring them along. He had the political astuteness, the common touch, the ability to bring humour in. Again, let me just give you an example. The last time he was at the Release Leaf was in 2005, and Arthur Goldlight is there to greet him. The car pulls up. Arthur now is beaming because he's now going to be seeing Nelson. Nelson gets out of the car and says, "Oh, Arthur, lovely to see you, and thanks to you I spent 27 years in prison." At which point, Arthur's face went ash white. Nelson was beaming and said, "Oh, let's go and sit." But the point being is that he was able to see the humorous side of things. I mean, that is a thing. Again, people want to say, well, what is the relevance of it? The fact of the matter is that he did have an idea, because the fact of the matter is that the papers that were found at Lily's Leaf were supposed to have been destroyed, and Arthur hid the papers in the coal shed at Lily's Leaf, which enabled the authorities to bring Nelson as accused number 1 to the Rivonia trial. But it highlights the individual, that he was a man of the moment who could also show humour, humility, and a political astuteness and political awareness of how to deal with intractable problems and how to ensure that they did not become stumbling blocks through the process of negotiation, which I believe we can all learn from the lessons of South Africa. Because we were on the verge of civil war after the assassination of Chris Hani. And those words that Nelson Mandela spoke, that you heard briefly, calmed the country down, both black and white. Because as Benji said, there was also fear amongst the whites. Anxiety that we are going to be killed. We are the minority, and there is a huge amount of resentment out there. But as, again, in concluding, Nelson said that freedom, walking out of prison, was only the start of the journey. It was not the end of the journey. And again, I think that's an important lesson Because I think sometimes people think once you start to negotiate, that is the end of the journey. But it's not. It's actually the beginning. The hard part began post-1994. Because that was when things could have fallen apart. And that is when leaders like Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Governor Mbeki and the others provided the moral turpitude and guidance to ensure that we traveled the path of peace, reconciliation and understanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Really, that was amazing. Thank you very much. I think we've broken some kind of record. We're ahead of schedule. So we have a little extra time for questions and answers, a little more than we thought we'd have, which is wonderful. And I'm sure there are many questions to the panelists. As I understand, there'll be someone with a roving microphone, right? I think the way we'll do this, to maximize the time of the audience and of the panelists, is we'll have a roving microphone going around and asking people, and everybody will ask their questions. I would really ask that you keep the questions to a minute and a half, not more than that. If you would like to direct your questions to the panel in general, you may do that. If you'd like to direct it to one particular panelist, you may do that. Once we've collected the questions, then each of the panelists will get, I think, we have about 10 or 15 minutes, so we can ask about 8 or 10 questions. And then each of the panelists will get about 5 minutes in turn to react to what was asked of the group at large. I think it's a more efficient way than question, answer. So, here we are. The floor is open to questions. We have a little more time than we expected. I think we're all very enriched by what we heard here of the man and of the leader. I'm looking forward to the question and to going deeper into the issues. So,
you see all?
I would like to ask Pastor Meir and anybody else on the panel who wants to answer. If there's a Middle East Nelson Mandela, is he going to be Palestinian or Israeli, and who will it be?
My question is for His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador. I'm actually not South African. I'm probably one of the few people in the room who isn't. But as a student leader in Britain in the 1970s, I was a big anti-apartheid campaigner. We all were. None of us knew what it was. We couldn't find South Africa on a map, but we knew we had to be against it. And we knew Nelson Mandela was a great man. He was an icon. And what I learned later, and what's being reinforced tonight, is no, he wasn't an icon. He was much better than that. He and the people who worked with him were, let me use the phrase in Yiddish, Glassman, right? They were great men. And this is supposed to be about the legacy of Nelson Mandela, and therefore the organisation that he led. So I've got here, I've theoretically seen it, the ANC's press statement about the situation in Gaza that was released today. It is a shoddy and dilettantish piece of work. It can't even get right the number of Israeli kids who were kidnapped and murdered. Mr. Ambassador, you are here as a representative of the Republic of South Africa. He is a member of the ANC, but his position as a representative of the government of South Africa. How does this kind of shoddy political posturing make your work as a serious diplomat easier or more difficult?
My question is to all the panelists, but in particular to the ambassador. Given the inherent differences between the situation in South Africa and in Israel. Would you agree that the main part of Madiba's legacy, which can perhaps provide some example for this area, is not the political process of change as occurred in either country, but primarily the spirit of Ubuntu, as it's called in South Africa, that spirit of forgiveness, that hopefully will enable both sides not only to reach an agreement, but after the agreement to be able to make bygones bygones, and enable both sides, when we have two states here, not to have two states divided by barbed wire and walls, but two states that will be like a miniature version of the EU, open borders, open people working, economies linked, etc., etc. Thank you.
To the entire panel, recognizing that Mandela had a collective leadership that adhered to certain principles, how do you think that can be created among the leadership in Israel or among the Palestinians?
Thank you. One of the most famous jokes about profession is how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? And it's only one, but the light bulb is going to want to change. Now, what happens if you've got two leaders who don't really want to change, and maybe you've got a nation that deep down does want to change? And I think that the leaders in South Africa from both sides became the leaders, the great leaders that they were. Leaders don't live in the they're made by the people as well. So there's something about the South African people that allowed Mandela and de Klerk into part of what they were and to make the peace that they did long term. So that if I'm looking at Israel, it could be that we have leaders on both sides that are not so ready to make peace. What is it about the country, the people in South Africa that did allow the peace to occur there, and what can you learn from that for Israel, from a grassroots level, that the people of Israel could try change the leadership and reflect some of what the legacy of what happened in South Africa to Israel? Absolutely, on both sides.
Mostly to Benjamin's argument. The question is, why did nobody mention the impact of the world community's ostracism of the white leadership in South Africa? And what would be the impact of this on the efforts for apologisms with regard to what's happening here?
Okay, thank you. To start with, my name is Rob. I'm an Eritrean. I'm here as a refugee. Before I start to ask my questions, it's fair for me to introduce myself and introduce who I am. Because I've been here and we have been discussing about the leadership of Mandela and the impact that it brought to the whole world, not only South Africa. So, as an Eritrean and as an asylum seeker here in Israel, I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very thankful to the people who invited me to be part of this fruitful conference. To start with, my question to Ambassador Sisa. As an African, have you ever tried to speak to the Israeli government about the Africans here in Israel being shipped to the concentration camps in the Negev? Or is there any initiative being taken by Africa in general and South Africa in particular about the situation and mistreatment of Africans by the current Israeli government? This is my first question to Ambassador Sisa. And the second question is, there are like 60,000 African migrants here. They are being treated by the Israeli government, as you all know, I think. So what I want to say, they had so many names, or so many vocabularies to call us. Some of them call us infiltrators, some of them call us demographic terrorists. So what I want to ask is, what will be the impact of the relation of Israel with the rest of the African countries? This is to Ambassador Sisa. The second question, and my third question to Mr. Benjamin. As we all know, racism in Israel is at its peak. So, what do you suggest to completely eradicate racism from Israel? Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here.
Question to the panel. As you look across the whole wide swathe of the Middle East, would you not agree that compared with all the other countries in the region, Israel is the rainbow nation? And using that yardstick, would you therefore not agree that most of the other countries in the Middle East display some of the worst habits of an apartheid state? And using that same yardstick, would you not agree that when you look at Israel as a liberal democratic society, that the potential of a Palestinian state, a declared Judenrein state, who has been oppressive to minorities and Christians, that a future Palestinian state could in fact be an apartheid state?
I'm not standing up. I want to ask you how there can be reconciliation here in Israel with the present occupation. I watched a film done with you, Mr. Bassan, and the journalist Gideon Levy called Against the Grain, and I urge every South African to watch this film. You will be filled with sadness and filled with despair.
We had a huge variety of comments and questions, some more pertinent to the topic at hand, some maybe a little less. And now I ask the panel to address the questions in the turn that they spoke, to address the questions, to address the comments. I think about 5 minutes each, and then it's an opportunity to wrap up. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much. Let me go straight to the ANC statement. As I said, I'm still a member of the ANC. But I'm in the diplomatic service, so I don't come here. If you remember, I said when I spoke here that one of the people, or many people, who taught ANC in exile, myself, were leaders, some of them from the Jewish community. So the ANC was an organization of knowledge, thinking. Now we have a problem I've been thinking about this. I'm going to South Africa, because we have a problem that is developing and is going to be more or less unless we take very proactive action. And I'm saying to this audience, because it's important we do it here as the Telfed, former South Africans living inside. We have the people, a Jewish stamp that crafted the liberation of South Africa. We have nothing after. These people are gone. All the whole job, what happens? Who comes after them? That's the question. There's nobody. All the younger people who are Jewish and others have gone away from the ANC. They are voting DA, they are doing this. Yes, that's the truth. Now you have a problem because in South Africa also, the Jewish community, they are sitting back, they are no more in the trenches of what are the challenges facing South Africa. The struggle goes on. One of the biggest problems we have in South Africa is lack of jobs, poverty, education. Where are the people? Somebody said one of the biggest backlash that's going to happen in South Africa now is the black middle class who after graduating and having done everything, they have no jobs. They've gone to the best universities, they've done this, they've got no jobs. They've got no jobs because nobody is bringing them into the mainstream of economy. Now we have a serious problem in South Africa because part of the people who are very influential in the economy are Jewish people. If you don't deal with this thing now, as the symptoms show in that statement, you are going to have a problem. We are going to have a serious problem because then the people who are wanting votes, Julius Malema, you all know, campaigning, they live on this thing. They live on who can make a very hard-line statement against Israel and everything. It's not a government statement. The government statement will come. And this is what I didn't read. The government statement, I read it, and it's going to come, it's not going to be the same. So I can say that. But it's a task, all of us, that have got to deal with. Now, Ubuntu reconciliation, quickly. I'm not going to answer all the questions. I'll give that others to take. Now, you see, part of the problem, which we miss in this, and this question has come about Ubuntu reconciliation. The other one was, what was something special about South Africa? What made peace happen? What made peace happen in South Africa? There came a point at which the leadership of the ANC has been saying to Mandela, we realized that we've got no other place to go in the globe, all of us. Whites are not going to go to Europe. Africans are not going to disappear. We share only one piece of land, geographically zoned as South Africa. Everybody, as the baseline, had to accept that, and we all accepted it. There's no other place we are going to go to. This is the only place that we've been given in the world. So once you accept that starting point, the problem is it accepted here? Is that the same starting point? Is it?
By some.
Huh?
By some.
That's the problem. Secondly, the other question is, reconciliation is not a leader's job. Reconciliation is about everyone taking their step. When Mandela was doing big things, meeting leaders, meeting Africans, I told you I was in the struggle and other places. Of course I was shot at, people tried to kill me more than 9 times or 10 times. I've got this guy, I was hit by a car bomb. But one of the tasks I had to do in 1992 was to go to the South African embassy and host the new South African flag in the embassy, in Glassman in Belgium. It was hosted by me. The ambassador was there. He asked me and my family to go and put the new South African flag here. And I had to start myself reconciling, meeting white South Africans across the board and understanding the past is over. And in the office, when I was an ambassador the first time, I was only African with some white South Africans. And I had to live with that and say, this is South Africa for all of us. So those are the small practical steps that are needed for every one of us to move forward. I will stop here. I don't want to take everyone's time. Other people will chip in and enrich I think the questions. The last one, the African, the Eritrean question, that's for me. We have looked at this issue, discussed it as African ambassadors. Of course, it was quite troubling. And of course, it's a critical situation. But when the delegation of the asylum seeker was received at the Knesset, we all said, at least the Knesset is listening, political leaders are listening, and therefore, let's not stampede the situation individually. Because it's complex, very, very complex. And of course, every country has an immigration problem in the world. I mean, in the world, there's immigration everywhere, difficulties. So we said, the problem we had when we could not be received, nobody was listening completely to you. We're not saying the situation is solved, it's not far from being solved. But we're treading cautiously, allowing the space. And there's a lot of citizens in Israel who are vocal about what should be done to refugees out of Israeli history and tradition. So be patient. I know we are suffering, but be patient. These things sometimes do work slowly. Thank you. Let's go.
Very good point you raised about the world. I didn't have time to deal with these things earlier. I believe that boycotts, sanctions, all those things, the refusal by American banks in 1986 to roll over loans, all contributed to the fall of apartheid in one way or another. But they were not as effective totally as many claim today. That's my study of the situation. In my view, what finally brought down apartheid was a cataclysmic world event. And that was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Because overnight, the African National Congress lost its patron. It lost its political support, its financial support, and its training support. It suddenly faced a new reality. On the white side, the whites lost the support of the West, which until then used to condemn apartheid, but actually support it. They supported the status quo for a very simple reason. South Africa was a treasure chest of minerals. The West had to have it. They were not prepared to allow the Soviet Union to get access to the platinum. 75% of the world's production of platinum comes from South Africa. Titanium, you name it, South Africa's got it. When the Cold War ended, the West was no longer interested in supporting the status quo, and the whites were left out to dry. And that focused the minds on both sides. And that, in my view, is what finally ended apartheid. The other factors, yeah, they all helped. Sports boycotts were tremendously important. They made, especially at whites, loved rugby, cricket, all the rest of it. You were made to feel a pariah when you went abroad. I can remember going to London with my wife, and she told me, and she has an English accent, she comes from Wales, and she went into a shop, and the shop assistant was terribly nice to her, and then she produced a credit card, which was South African. She said in a split second, the atmosphere changed. And she nearly broke out crying. She was so upset. Well, this was happening all over the place. People were treated like pariahs. It got to them. But these are just factors. So in our case, when I look at our situation, and in my bleaker moments, and I look at the failure of leadership on both sides, and I look at how people on both sides have developed for all sorts of reasons, and that's another hour's lecture, you could read my book about it, whichever you prefer. People, the hatred, the prejudice, the fear are growing every day in this country. And in my bleaker moments, I think perhaps we've got to wait for the Messiah to come. That is going to be the catastrophic event. Otherwise, because again, the point that was made earlier, I left South Africa in 1986 because my newspaper, the Rand Daily Mail, was closed down because of our opposition to apartheid. And I left out of a sense of total despair. My best friends were in jail, had been killed, were banned. I saw no future. I just saw apartheid going on and on into the future forevermore. And I didn't want to be part of it, apart from which I was unemployable. So I went abroad. 8 years later, Keku Lekala, no, all gone, finished. This is the miracle of human existence. It's a slender hope to have to base your life on, but we somehow have to cling for that, and in the meantime, keep building those bridges, as we did in South Africa, against all the obstacles of apartheid. There were people on both sides who held on to each other, who made friends, and when circumstances changed, there were enough influential whites and blacks who knew each other, who trusted each other, and worked together. And that, I think, is a lesson for us. Now, about migrants. Ah, sorry, well, I just say, well, okay.
For next time.
Is he coming back? I see, okay, I'll come back with this. Israel compared with other countries. I don't care. I know who we are, who we should be. What limited knowledge I've got a son who's a rabbi, but I've still got a limited knowledge of Judaism, but what I know of it, I know how we should be behaving. And we're not behaving in that way. And that's what I want to see in this country. I couldn't say less. I'm horrified by Syria, by Saudi Arabia, by Sri Lanka, by every other godforsaken place in the world. But I live here, this is where I'm to see us behaving like human beings. How can there be peace while there's occupation? I agree, totally. We've got to get out. It's all there is to it. And again, I don't want to keep plugging my book, but I did I looked at this very heavily. It cost me dear. My wife kept begging me to finish the wretched book. She said I was becoming unlivable with. I was depressed, angry, upset. And the section on the settlements, when you look at what we're doing, if you take the bits and pieces that are reported day in and day out and you put them together, I must tell you, the picture is horrifying of what we are doing to ourselves. We are brutalizing them and we're brutalizing ourselves. And we're attacking, undermining our own rule of law. We are misusing and misappropriating millions and millions of dollars. This, to me, is destroying Israel. And I agree, and that won't bring peace. The occupation, ending the occupation, is only the first step. There's got to be much else. There'll still be hatred, but we've still got to go on. That is the first step. Thank you.
Yes, towards your question, what do you want the South African press release to be? To appreciate the Israeli attacking on civilians? I don't think that any government around the world will do it. On the other side, don't worry from the press release, it is only for the public relation. You are not going to spend the whole night in the shelter because of the press release, that's for sure. Now, we should have also to be a little bit more humanitarian, in my opinion. As I am, as a Palestinian, I visited Sderot, and I saw exactly what is the rockets harassed in Sderot. I think that also bombing civilians in Gaza, I think that it should have to hurt any humanitarian being on the earth. No doubt about it. We couldn't say that all the people in Gaza are Hamas, all the people in Gaza are armed people, all the people in Gaza are shooting rockets towards Israel. Not all of them. Of course, there are terrorists among them, no doubt about it, but still the majority in the Gaza Strip are totally unarmed and civilian society. Towards your question about the apartheid, yes, The whole Middle East is apartheid, by the way. Now, we are in a situation that probably the apartheid is better than anything else. If you want to compare what's going on in Syria as an example, I still prefer to live in an apartheid country. Now, the problem of the Middle East also, that we in the Middle East make the corruption as the qualification, as a qualification in the 21st century. What do you want also? This is the Middle East. Everybody is doing whatever he wants. There is no international control on the Middle East. And it looks like that it's very difficult to control even the Middle East. So, apartheid, I don't know about the future of the Palestinian state, if it is going to be, but if the Palestinian state is going to be an apartheid, looks like that the Palestinians deserve it. If the Palestinians don't want it, I want to see the Palestinians that they are resisting against such kind of apartheid in terms to bring for freedom. I think that the Palestinians right now has enough knowledge. What does it mean freedoms? And what does it mean human rights? And I hope that the Palestinians will start acting according to it when they will get their own independence. Right now, the Palestinians are not quite sure that the current Palestinian leadership is going to bring it.
80s, in South African white business began to realize that this no longer was serving the self-interest of capital. And it did cause a huge rupture within the ANC and a huge debate. Because for the first time, the ANC had to take a look and say, we can't, the simplistic argument that apartheid was defined by racial issues was being challenged. So, in looking at the collapse of the apartheid system, one has to look at a broad range of issues. Some of them were internal. By that, the UDF and the rise of the movement within the country, economic imperatives about the shift and dynamics and the structural changes that were taking place. And business started to actually, in the mid-80s, make overtures to the ANC. Because they were actually one of the first groups within the country who started to recognize the need that the apartheid system, as it was no longer practical. So yes, this evening we have skipped and we have simplified the fall of apartheid. Now, I'm finding it very interesting. This is my first trip to Israel. And I'm finding it quite interesting because a lot of things are extremely emotionally driven. As I mentioned, I came from Yad Vashem this afternoon, and we had a panel discussion. And I made a comment, and the reaction of the group was, are you anti-Semitic? I sort of, I'm Jewish, but I suppose I could be anti-Semitic. And it was perceived to be an attack on Jews. Because I was attacking the state of Israel, I was accused of attacking Jews, and that was actually quite an eye-opener. And why do I raise it with regard to what you said when you were talking about Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the other? I believe if we use South Africa again as an example of what we were trying to achieve, when we looked at it from a point of view of justice, because that is what it comes down to a large degree, when we were moving forward, because of, and the Israelis and what the study of the Holocaust and the question of how do you deal with the perpetrators, victim justice, survivor justice, crimes against humanity. South Africa took, to a large degree, and these are not my words, this comes from a gentleman by the name of Mohammed Mandela, who talked about political justice, which was all-inclusive. And you may say, why am I talking about that? Because the question of what is happening in these other countries, to a large extent, is irrelevant to the issues that are happening here. We can't look and say, well, what's happening in other parts of the Middle East, because then is that going to dictate how you approach the issue that is being confronted now. And that, I think, is something that we need to look at. You know, that yes, there is an impact about what happens in Saudi Arabia, but that shouldn't be in terms of how the issue of the Palestinian-Israeli crisis should be addressed. The question should be, how do we plan to approach this internally? And what are the issues that we need to confront? And how do we deal with it? And what is the line that we are going to take? And finally, the question of the press release. I mean, look, I am a loyal member of the ANC. The ambassador has made reference. And I think, again, one needs to understand the historical context of the traditions of the ANC. I mean, it was very clear. I mean, Mandela associated with those organizations, as Benji made reference to, who supported the ANC. And, you know, America turned to him and said at one point, how can you associate with Colonel Gaddafi, the Iranians? He said they were loyal to us.
There's no conciliation in that statement.
The rabbi statement, the ANC's disgraceful statement that came out last week. Absolutely disgraceful. Where they're talking about...
I'm sorry, we have to continue with the program, we have to evacuate through the other agenda items.
Okay, very simply, all I'm going to say is, look, it is, you may perceive it as a disgraceful statement. You may say that this is not a reconciliation statement. But the idea is you have to also appreciate the fact that the ANC has a particular position. And the question is, it is a political statement. And we all know that political statements, to some degree, belie what is under, which is not the real issues. There are underlying, there is a public statement and then there's a private held belief. And those, I think, that needs to be recognized. I mean, to just suddenly dismiss it as, I believe, a disgusting statement.
I'm not dismissing it. The atrocities...
But I think, you know, all I'm saying is that one must see it within the context of the traditions of the ANC and what they've said before in the past. Positions that they've done. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you very much, Nick. I hope next time you come to Israel, you'll come to a calmer time. Thank you very much, Ambassador Benjamin Bassem. This was an outstanding evening, I think. I'm very privileged to have been involved in it. It was very insightful, it was very informative, very civilized. I do hope it has a follow-up. I understand that I have the mic to Les, yes?
Yeah.
And we're exactly on schedule. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Before we move to the next point, I just want to point out this poster here, which has been put together by Tamara, who's come down from Naharia. And Les is going to present her with a gift from us in appreciation of this. And I think it really encompasses the theme, if you think about what Dov Lippman was saying, and our other guests were saying this evening. And what more can encompass the ethic and the legacy of Nelson Mandela? Les.
Thanks. On behalf of Stephen Wilson Company, auctioneers of fine art, and South African Gold Coin Exchange, it gives me great pleasure to present this medal to you, Tamar. As a student of Amal Naharia, you won first prize in the art exhibition in Cologne. For your artwork on Nelson Mandela, the message to choose peace over revenge. This message is so very applicable for today. The medal commemorates Nelson Mandela Nobel Prize for Peace, which was jointly awarded to him and de Klerk in 1993. Mandela's long walk to freedom and his incarceration on Robben Island appear on the medal as symbols of his life and legacy. The medallion was minted in sterling silver at the Royal Mint in Norway. There's also a certificate from Telfed in recognition of your outstanding work. On behalf of Wits alumni, it's just a small token.
The round's week.
So many presents. I'm a bit nervous, sorry. I'm not used to speak in front of the novice and in English. The poster, I started designing it in December. I studied art and graphics class. My teacher came to the class and said we had a contest. We had to choose an cultural hero. It could be an item or a person. I decided to choose Nelson Mandela because it was a few weeks after he passed out. And also the night before I saw a program about him on Discovery, and I was very affected and about his ideas. So I decided to pick him. I don't know. After when I started designing it, I thought about a sentence that will sum up this poster. I just thought about this one. To choose peace instead of revenge. I choose the colors blue and red. Red for the revenge and blue for the peace. And later I thought that those two colors also are the top colors and bottom of the South African flag, so I also added those. And that's basically all. Thank you.
The next steps, no?
Yeah, well, I don't know.
And then words of thanks and farewell.
Before I say anything to you, I must tell you that I found myself, I'm very emotional about this. Sorry, can I be emotional?
Please, go loud.
I found myself in Johannesburg at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, sitting with Razia Saleh, a South African of Muslim belief. And here I was, an ex-South African living in Israel, explaining to Razia Saleh about this poster. And I'd never met you before, Tamara. Okay? And it was amazing the dialogue that went on between us. And she wanted to know, what does this mean, and what does this mean, and why this, and why this. And I hope you're going to give me some kind of JPEG or something that I can send back to her, okay, because she wants to see this poster in a better format than what I showed to her. Okay, so that for me was an amazing thing. And actually preparing this whole event and working on this event was an amazing journey. And I think the journey has just started. And what we see the future for this journey is to set up some sort of event, and I'm not going to waste time going into the presentation now, okay? You'll hear more about it. And we would like to set up an event where we get people from different walks of life, youth, come and share a communal experience and learn about Nelson Mandela and learn to understand the context in which they live in their societies and have this experiential workshop. There are a number of candidates that can house this kind of workshop. There's the Irgun called Nevet, there's Bina, there's Givat Chaviva, there's Dror Israel, there's Paris Center for Peace. And what we're going to do is we're going to formulate together with people, what we believe the nature of such a seminar should be. There's been thinking that's been going on into this. And what we look to from you all sitting here is assistance in helping us putting this together. And that assistance can be in terms of actual kind, or assistance in terms of ideas. And so we'd like to have you contact us. We created an email. It's mandelaInIsrael@gmail.org. And we'd like you to make contact with us, and we'll keep up contact with you, and we'll let you know where we go. But this is only the beginning of a journey that we're beginning. Thank you.
My name is Jonathan Zausmer. I'm one of the team of dedicated people who saw this event as an important challenge. And I'd like to say a few words of thanks to all those involved. The matter of Mandela and South Africa within the Israeli reality is one charged with a certain amount of apprehension for reasons that are known to everyone. However, I speak for all those involved in saying that the inspiration coming directly out of the Mandela legacy gave strength of purpose to ensure that this unforgettable event takes place. A huge thanks to our speakers, Ambassador Sisa Ngombeni, a true friend, and as we like to say, a mensch, who shows warmth, generosity and support, not only in this initiative, but to all South Africans. We're privileged to have you in Israel, and we thank you for being part of this event from the ground up. Benjamin Pogrund, a legend in his own time, worked endlessly finding ways to bypass any obstacle in order to make this event happen. Thank you so much. Your insights are valuable. Mr. Bassamed, fearless guardian of human rights and pioneer of dialogue and mutual respect between people, thank you so much. You came from South Africa. We're honored to have you here and value your perceptions, the perceptions that you share with us. Thank you so much. And of course, thanks to Ambassador Toba Herzl for her words and her grace as Master of Ceremonies. And the member of PSF, Lord Glassman, who came here on behalf of the government of Israel and spoke to us. Thank you for his decisive perceptions and guidance throughout. Thanks to Max Moss for his tireless work, leadership and dedication, and to Yair Moss who prepared the film clip. Thanks to Ian Roger for his support and level-headed wisdom. Thanks to Les Glassman who steadfastly promoted this event. Thanks to Doran Klein and the dedicated staff at Telfed. And a very big thanks to Dave Bloom, the chairman of Telfed, who steered this ship to a safe port with everything that means, and has worked tirelessly to ensure its success, and has shown leadership, astute management, and decorum throughout. Finally, thanks to you members of the audience, who at this very tribal time and at quite a lot of risk came to be part of this unique event. In a recent article I wrote in the Times of Israel, which looks back at the traumatic events of the last few weeks and urges readers to attend this meeting, I wrote the following: and if you all take home with you a piece of the Mandela legacy, you may find its nourishment for the soul after this terrible week. I now believe and hope that we're taking not a piece of the legacy, but the vision itself. And if we can take this vision and apply it in our own individual, modest way, I believe we've achieved something here tonight. Thank you very much.